give us an update. How are things going in Georgia?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's very interesting. This time 4 years ago, we had 1.3 million people apply to vote by mail in Georgia. A lot of people don't know Joe Biden's entire margin in the 2020 election came from absentee by mail voters. He won those votes by about 400,000. So it was 1.3 million 4 years ago. So far, we've had 250,000 total requests at the same time in this cycle. So dramatically down. Only about 5,000 votes returned so far. This time 4 years ago, it was over 400,000. So that critical block of votes that put Joe Biden over the top in the certified count has been dramatically reduced from 4 years ago. Those votes that have been returned, about 2/3 are white, over half are over 65. So a lot of the data we're looking at, we don't have partisan voter registration in Georgia, but very early returns look favorable for President Trump and the Republican ticket.
What part of the state is performing well, and do we see a similar early voting surge with the Stacey Abrams cartel in downtown Atlanta, in Gwinnett, in Cobb, in Fulton?
Well, what we can say for certain is that the absentee operation from 4 years ago just isn't there, right? I mean, it's 81% lower this time than it was 4 years ago. Early voting here starts on Tuesday. We'll have a very good sense, I think, by the end of the week what's happening there. We'll have a lot of day-by-day data. I will say that the polling certainly indicates that self-identified conservatives, over 51%, are planning to vote early. We'd love to see that number go higher, but if that's what happens, it will be dramatically higher than 4 years ago. And so we're very encouraged by the enthusiasm we're seeing around the state. And again, just not seeing Kamala Harris close the deal with black voters, which she has to do to get competitive. She has to win over 90% of the black vote here in Georgia to really put this thing in play. Right now, even the AJC's own polling is showing her in the mid-70s with that group.
Whoa. So let's just take a pause there, Josh. So in order for her to be competitive, that's within 30,000 votes winning, 30,000 votes losing, right? That's what we consider competitive, basically a 60,000 vote swing. She has to go 90+% with black voters in the state of Georgia. She's in the mid-70s. You're talking about a 15-point delta that she needs to close to just get close in Georgia. Now, I'm not saying we're going to win automatically because there's a ton of white liberals that have moved in to Buckhead that can screw all this up, as you well know. But talk more about what's happening in the black community in Atlanta.
Yeah, so I can tell you, this is anecdotal, but obviously I speak to lots of voters. I've been involved in Georgia politics for 20 years. I've never had as many conversations with black voters saying they're voting for the Republican candidate for president as I've had this year with black voters saying they're voting for President Trump. And that softness in the polling, the fact that she hasn't closed the deal, the fact they're sending Barack Obama to Georgia to try to rally black voters, particularly black male voters, shows that they know they have a very significant problem. This is going to be competitive. It's obviously going to be close. But these data points give us a lot of encouragement that President Trump is really making even more inroads than he did in 2020 with that critical black vote. If we can get to 20% of the black vote in the state, it will be an early night in Georgia.
Yeah, and so let's zero in on that. What are we seeing as far as enthusiasm from our strongest counties? Georgia, I believe, has the most counties of any battleground state total. I think Wisconsin has the most per capita, but you guys have so many counties. I think it's like over 100 counties. You could correct me. And a lot of them are underperforming Republican strongholds. That could have got Herschel Walker elected, by the way, alone if they would have just had higher turnout. What are we seeing on the ground as far as spirit, energy, enthusiasm? And then also, you said you don't have party registration, or is that party returns or party registration? Because I thought you guys had registration by political party. So tell me how voter registration ended in Georgia.
Yeah, so we do not have voter registration by party. What we generally do is look at primary voting preference to try to get an idea of where that is. Republicans do have a significant edge. If you factor in unaffiliated voters, obviously it's not an absolute majority, but they're more registered voters that have voted in Republican primaries going into this election than registered voters that have voted in Democratic primaries. And you're right, we have a lot of counties, 159 to be exact. About 20 of those counties are the really big counties, the really big urban centers around the state, and exurban, suburban counties will be watching very closely. I see lots of enthusiasm at the Turning Point chasing events we're participating in all over the state. You have record crowds. Every time we have a Trump Force 47 training, we're seeing tremendous enthusiasm, standing room only crowds. This is not what we were seeing even 4 years ago. So I feel like the enthusiasm is there. I feel like people are going to be turning out early next week. We're very excited to see when the gun goes off Tuesday morning and people start voting, we'll get a better picture of that. But right now, I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing.
How many people do you, I know these are wonky questions, Josh, but how many people do you project to vote by mail, and how many voted by mail in 2020?
So it was about 1.35 million that voted by mail in 2020. And right now, as I'm talking to you today, there have only been 250,000 requests to vote by mail. So we know it's going to be dramatically less. It's been trending for the last 2 weeks between 80 and 85% of that number. 20 to 25% of that number. So I would expect, between maybe 300,000 and 400,000 votes by mail, which will be, significantly less, almost a million.
So I got to interrupt. So if you were to model, I think you know this, by what margin did Biden win early votes in 2020?
So we vote three ways in Georgia. Biden lost on Election Day voting. Biden lost during the 3 weeks of in-person early voting. The only category Biden won was votes by mail. He won that by 395,000 votes. And I don't think we'll have 395,000 absentee ballots in this entire election.
No, this is so important. I started to keep interrupting you. I know we have a delay because I'm traveling, but I'm doing all the kind of back of paper math here in my notepad. So you had 1.3 million people vote by mail, of which Joe Biden had a net 395,000, which means if it was 1.3 million, that means he
about 850,000 votes for Biden.
Yeah, I was just doing it in my head. Yeah, okay, exactly. 850,000 votes. So even if Kamala Harris wins vote by mail by similar percentages, if you guys only have 300,000 people voting by mail, she could at best get a net 100,000. Is my math correct here, Josh? And she also has collapsing black support. So,
yeah, the problem that the Harris campaign is going to have is they will have to try to convert over a lot of these people that the Biden campaign were able to get to fill out an absentee ballot and return it by mail. They're going to have to physically get them to a precinct, either during early voting or Election Day voting. And obviously that is a bigger lift than showing up at somebody's house and getting them to fill out a ballot and sticking it in a drop box. So I'm encouraged by the fact that we're not seeing the numbers of absentee ballot requests that we saw at this time 4 years ago.
Well, yeah, and Josh, stay right there. I want you for another segment. And look, for all of you guys, election integrity experts and election integrity enthusiasts, of which I am one, when you have 1 million less ballots in the system, you're going to have a cleaner election. That's just a fact of life, okay? 1 million, and that's Jimmy Carter's own words, a Georgian himself, who said this vote by mail thing is totally flawed. So you have 1 million less ballots in the system, which is what we're on pace for in Georgia. You're going to have a crisper and cleaner election. And the South has long, we'll talk about this after the break, had an in-person early voting culture, which is great. I'm glad they have that. It is very Southern. Not every state embraces that. Pennsylvania certainly doesn't. But Georgia has. We'll talk about that after the break. And I'll build out these numbers more, which are very promising out of Georgia. Very promising, everybody.